Hi guys, welcome back to Kim's class. The next 3 units will explore each of the 3 time tenses for verbs. In the first unit, we'll look deeper into the present tense by including aspects of the present tense. We'll learn about the simple present, present continuous, present perfect, and present perfect continuous. Then we'll do the same with the aspects of the past tense. And then, of course, in Unit 3, we'll talk about the 4 aspects of the future tense. I found that teaching that all 12 units together, with all of the tenses together, can be a little more confusing than when I teach a time tense all together. I hope I'm right. After each video, there will be a link to an activity for you to practice what you have learned. You'll find the link in the description of each of the videos. Let's talk about why mastering verbs is important. In English, it's possible to express several different tenses through a combination of words as well as by changing the form of the verb. Understanding these tenses allows you, the writer and speaker, with a clearer presentation of the sequence of events and the passage of time described in your writing or in your speaking. So let's take a look at these verb tenses all together. Remember, in each lesson, I'll be talking about each time tense differently. So verb tenses come in 3 times: past, present, and future. Each one of these time tenses has 4 aspects. For example, simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous. Take a look at example sentences for each of these time tenses and the aspects. I won't read them for you, but I suggest you pause your video and write these sentences that you see in the chart. Writing down what you have learned will help you learn it clearer, better, and faster. Pause your video and write these sentences down. Don't worry if it seems a little overwhelming. Remember, I'm going to break each of the 3 time tenses into separate lessons. For each lesson, we'll talk about what the tense is, when it's used, and how to use it. In the past lesson, we explored the 4 aspects of the past tense. And the lesson before that, we talked about the 4 aspects of the present tense. In this lesson, we're going to look into the future tenses. Talking about the future tenses tends to be a little more complicated than the past or in the present, at least in regards to when to use each of those 4 aspects. But it's okay, because some of the aspects of the future tenses are really not used very much. However, understanding when you can use them will show a higher level of proficiency. You may even sound more proficient than the average native English speaker. So just like in the previous lessons, I'm going to start with an overview of all of the aspects, then talk about each aspect individually. I'll compare some of the more confusing aspects together, and then there'll be an opportunity to practice what you've learned. Let's go ahead and look at the basic comparison of the 4 aspects of the future tense. On your screen, you'll see a basic overview of the 4 aspects. You might want to pause the video and write this chart down. Remember, like I've said, writing things down in your own handwriting helps you learn this information far better than just looking at it. There are, of course, other descriptions and examples of each of these aspects than what you see here in this basic chart. This is why I'm going to go over in more detail each of these aspects on the next few slides. Let's go ahead and start with the future simple. Simple future has two different forms in English: will and be going to. Although the two forms can sometimes be used interchangeably, which meaning the same thing, sometimes they can express two different meanings. These different meanings might seem a little abstract at first. However, they'll become more clear with some practice. So both will and be going to refer to a specific time in the future. Let's talk about the word will. Will is used to express a voluntary action. It often suggests that the speaker is going to do something voluntarily. A voluntary action is one where the speaker offers to do something for someone else. Often we use will to respond to someone else's complaint or request for help. We also use will when we request that someone help us or volunteer to do something for us. Similarly, we use will not or won't. But let's look at some of these examples of sentences that express voluntary action. Hue will work for you tomorrow. I will help you make dinner. Voluntary. We also use will to express a promise. Will is usually used in promises, like the example sentence, I will call you as soon as I get home. Or, don't worry, I will be careful. You see how those sentences are promises? Now let's look at the words be going to. Many times the word be going to expresses a plan. Something that we plan to do, or an idea that a person intends to do in the future. It doesn't really matter if the plan is realistic or not. For example, he is going to spend his vacation in Hawaii. Or they are going to drive to Alaska. Do you see how that works? We can use will and be going to interchangeably, which means sentences could mean the same. Both will and be going to express a prediction, something that you think is going to happen in the future. They're guesses about what you think is going to happen. In prediction sentences, the subject usually has little control over the future, and therefore the uses that we saw previously don't apply. In the two examples I'm going to read to you, there's no difference in meaning. For example, we can say John Smith will be the next president, or John Smith is going to be the next president. Both of those sentences mean the same thing. So, Now that we've gone over when we might use that future simple, let's go ahead and look at the positive, the negative, and the interrogative. Again, like all of the other tenses we've learned in the last lessons, you can form positive, negative, or interrogative sentences with the future simple. As we learn, the future simple can be formed with either will or going to, and the base form of the main verb. Look at the chart. I've broke it down to make it look so you can see the will sentences and the going to sentences. You can say, I will work, or I am going to work. You will work, or you are going to work. He will work, or he is going to work. In the negative, you can say, I will not work, or I am not going to work. You will not work. You are not going to work. He will not work. He is not going to work. Now we can do the same thing using will and going to when we ask questions. Will I work? Am I going to work? Will you work? Are you going to work? Will he work? Is he going to work? And just like we talked about in the present tense lessons, it's more common and formal to not use the contractions when you write. However, like I said, we do use them a lot in formal speech. These contractions may be new to you, so I'm going to call them to your attention. The contraction form of the pronoun will is I'll. I will, I'll. You will, you'll. We will, we'll. They will, they'll. He will, he'll. She will, she'll. And it will, it'll. That's a funny word, isn't it? It'll. These are not as common, but you do hear them in speech sometimes. Another contraction you may not have understood is the contraction that we use for will not. Will not contracts to won't. Another thing that you may hear a lot in informal speech is the word going to pronounced gonna. I am going to work. I'm gonna work. If you're interested in an entire lesson on gonna and wanna, check out my video series called Street Talk. It might be a fun escape from learning about verb tenses. So let's go ahead and look at the aspect of the future continuous. The future continuous has two different forms, will be doing and be going to be doing. But unlike the simple future forms, future continuous forms are usually interchangeable. That means you can say either one. Also, understand that in the simple future, a specific time is used to show the time that an action will begin or it will end. But in the future continuous, a specific time interrupts the action. Let's look at some of the examples of when to use this aspect. We use the aspect to show an interrupted action in the future. It's an action in the future that was interrupted or stopped by a shorter action. Remember that this can be a real interruption or an interruption in time. For example, I will be sleeping when you get home. I am going to be studying when the movie starts. Do you see the interruption? We also use this aspect for a specific time as an interruption in the future. So in the first sentences we saw, the future continuous is interrupted by a short action. In addition to using short actions as interruptions, you can also use a specific time as an interruption. For example, tonight at 9 p.m., I will be studying. At midnight, we are going to be driving. Did you see how that worked? And the last use of this aspect we use to describe parallel actions in the future. So when you use the future continuous with two actions in the same sentence, it expresses the idea that both actions will be happening at the same time. The actions are parallel. Let's look at the example. I will be studying and he will be making dinner. Parallel actions. Tonight, they're going to be eating, talking about their plans, and having a good time. Those are three parallel actions. So, now that we've gone over when to use continuous, let's look at the positive, the negative, and the interrogative. As with the past continuous, the present continuous, and the future continuous, we include the to be, the main verb, plus ing. Remember, you can form positive, negative, or interrogative sentences using this future continuous. Remember also that we can use the words will be to show the future or am going to show the future. I will be working. I am going to be working. He will be working. He is going to be working. In the negative, I will not be working. I am not going to be working. And we can also ask questions in this tense. Will he be working? Will he be going to be working? Again, be careful of the contractions as I mentioned on the other slide. We usually write out the full contraction for was not and were not in our writing. But when you're speaking, feel free to use the contraction form wasn't and weren't. On most exams, though, you're always going to want to follow the rule to write the entire word out. So, now that we've discussed the future continuous, let's look at the past perfect. Future perfect has two different forms: will have done and be going to have done. But unlike the simple future forms, future perfect forms are interchangeable. Whew, that means they both mean the same. The future perfect shows a completed action before something in the future. It expresses an idea that something will occur before another action in the future. It can also show that something will happen before a specific time in the future. Notice that in the examples that you see on your screen, that the reference points, which I've put in italics, which are that kind of crooked writing, those italic words are in the simple present rather than the simple future. And this is because it's showing the interruptions are in time clauses, and you can't use future tense in time clauses. Look carefully at those sentences. We also use this aspect for showing a duration before something in the future. It's showing that something will continue up until another action in the future. Although what you see there, the use of future perfect is normally limited to non-continuous verbs and non-continuous uses of mixed verbs, like the words live, work, teach, and study. They're sometimes used in this way, even though they're not necessarily non-continuous verbs. I suggest that you pause your video and write some of these example sentences down. Once you've done that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the future perfect, positive, negative, and interrogative sentences. So once again, you'll see on your screen the different forms of this future perfect tense. But before I show you the examples, remember that the sentences I use are very short. Remember that in order for them to mean what you want them to, there needs to be an expressed, either written or something understood of an event that will occur before another action in the future. Let's look at some examples from the chart. I will have worked. I am going to have worked. He will have worked. He is going to have worked. You will have worked. You are going to have worked. In the negative, I will not have worked. I am not going to have worked. She has not worked. She is not going to have worked. You have worked. You are not going to have worked. And in the question form, will I have worked? Or am I going to have worked? Will you have worked? So even though all the sentences say will have worked or am going to have worked, in order for this tense to be correctly used, there needs to be additional information. I will have worked in the U.S. for 2 years by the time I leave. The important part of this sentence is what comes after the sentence, I will have worked. Without it, it might be unclear if you're using this aspect correctly. The good news is that this aspect of the future is not very common, but it is more common than the next and the last aspect of the future, which is the future perfect continuous. The perfect continuous is easily the least common of the 12 tenses that we've learned in the last 3 lessons. The perfect continuous is formed using the word had, been, plus the present participle with the ing. Future perfect continuous has 2 different forms. Will have been doing and be going to have been doing. Whew. Unlike though the other forms, these can be interchangeable. It means they mean the same thing. So there's two ways to form the aspect of the future tense. Like I said, will have been plus the present participle. Or if you're using be going to, you're going to either use am, is, or are plus going to have been plus the present participle. Let's look at what some of these uses are. So sometimes we might use this aspect to emphasize a duration before something in the future. For 5 minutes, for 2 weeks, and since Friday are all durations which can be used with the future perfect continuous. Notice that this is related to the present perfect continuous and the past perfect continuous. However, with the future continuous, the duration stops at or before a reference point in the future. Notice in the example sentences that you see that the reference points are marked in italics. Those words are in the simple present rather than the simple future. This is because these future events are time clauses. You can't use the future tenses in time clauses. The other aspect and the other way we use this form is to emphasize a cause of something in the future. Using the future perfect continuous before another action in the future is a really good way to show cause and effect. Look at those sentences that you see on the screen. Pause your video and write them down. So again, like all of the other 11 tenses we've talked about, we can form positive, negative, or interrogative sentences using the future perfect continuous. But as I said, this is the least common aspect of the future tense. So I'm not going to spend much time on this slide or reading these examples. However, I do suggest you pause the video, as I hoped you did on the other slides, and write these sentences down. What I will do before the close of this lesson on the future tense is briefly cover the differences between the future continuous and the future perfect continuous. Go ahead, pause your video, write down these sentences, and then when you start the video back up, we'll go ahead and talk and compare these two very different and confusing tenses. So, before we close this lesson on the future tenses, let's take a minute and look at the two continuous forms of the future tense. We have the future continuous versus the future perfect continuous. The major differences between these two aspects has to do with if you use a time word or not. If you do not include a duration like 5 minutes or for 2 weeks or since Friday, many English speakers choose to use the future continuous rather than the future perfect continuous. But be careful, because this can change the meaning of the sentence. Future continuous emphasizes an interrupted action, whereas the future perfect continuous emphasizes a duration of time before something in the future. Study the examples you see on the screen to understand where these differences are. In our first example, we see, he will be tired because he will be exercising so hard. This sentence emphasizes that he will be tired because he will be exercising at the exact moment in the future. Look at the next example. He will be tired because he will have been exercising so hard. This sentence emphasizes that he will be tired because he will have been exercising for a period of time. It is possible that he will still be exercising at that moment, or that he will have just finished. I realize that there was a lot of information in this video. I do hope, however, that teaching all 4 aspects of this tense side by side helped you see things a little clearer. Although there's nothing more than I would like to teach you face to face with all of you here in an actual classroom, there is an advantage to having these lessons in video format. Can you guess what that is? You can pause the video, write notes, answer and ask questions you might have, and even watch the information or the instruction again. Remember, like I said, writing down the information in the charts and writing example sentences helps you understand the concepts more thoroughly. Additionally, don't forget that I have made activities to help you practice what you learned here in this video. You'll find links to those activities in the comments section below. You also may see a link to another video in my Action English series or in my Street Talk series. This will give you more practice in putting these tenses together and learning some of the contractions that you might have seen in the previous lesson. But for now, that concludes today's lesson. But before you go, I'd like to ask you to do a few things. If you enjoyed this video, would you please like this video? Also, I'd love it if you subscribed to this channel. That way, every time I post a new video, you'll be notified. Wouldn't you like that? Another thing that you can do is share this video. I bet you know people in your community that might benefit from learning the lessons that you learned today. The last thing I'd like you to do is write a comment in the comment section. I can't be here in class with you face to face, but I would love to hear from you. So write me a comment in the section below. Tell me how much you enjoyed the video or even any questions that you might have. I'd love to hear from you. And lastly, please don't forget what a blessing it is for me to share this passion with you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to come on this journey with you to learn English. Goodbye for now. I really hope I'll see you soon.